How did you guys become attached to the power of film?
Well,
Well,
we were both Howard students many years ago, back in the 90s, and both Doug and I were TAs for Howard. We went to UCLA a few years apart from each other, but we both studied under him. We were his TAs, and he's been a mentor to both of us.
yeah, that's how we got connected. And then Howard, a long time ago, he just started thinking like, I'd love to take what I teach. He wrote a book called The Power of Film, which is, of course, related to this series, but it's not like our series isn't a faithful reproduction of that book either. He just thought a series might be interesting. I think he was inspired by, like PBS type series like Joseph Campbell and other things that are, you know, intellectual but stimulating. And we always knew that the combination of Howard's voice, really good film scenes, and music works really powerfully. We'd done some tests, and he had done a Criterion Collection thing on Laserdisc way back in the day.
Oh,
Like
wow.
Laserdisc came out. He did The Graduate, Some Like It Hot, and High Noon. And he did a voice over analysis throughout the entire movie. They're still out there. You can actually find it on Criterion Collection. And it was amazing. I'd taken his class, but I'd never heard anything quite like it. I was like, this is so entertaining because I'm hearing things I'd never thought about in terms of the characters, what's actually happening underneath everything else. Sure, it's a gunfight, and sure, this is happening, and sure, there's that, but what's really happening? And that's kind of the headline for Howard's teaching is he's always like, okay, the movie's about this, but what's it really about? What's the power structure? What's happening?
Right. And that's the thing I found fascinating about the power of film. Just in the first two episodes, what he was talking about, but films that we've seen probably 50 or so times, but he reached out to a specific point in the film that we never thought of it that way. So, as students as his, did that grow your appreciation for film that much more?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was that a question? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Did it grow your appreciation that much more being a student of his?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, I think both. I'll speak for Doug because I've heard Doug answer this question. But I think that the beauty of making this project was that Doug and I, and especially Doug, because Doug did so much of the editing, but we got to go back and really sort of be students all over again. And a
Mhm.
lot of those things resonated more deeply in our 50s than it did when we were in our 20s.
Because he's talking about lives. He does this thing like a lot of people are expecting a history of the great American movies, or they're expecting us something about the actors or celebrity, or they're expecting just some really dry academic analysis with some professor going, well, everybody knows that the page 45 of the original script was, he does a little bit of that just for color, but he really
Right.
is talking about you. He's talking about human beings and storytelling that's gone on for tens of thousands of years. Literally, he's talking about incredibly human urges and motivations and deceptions and paradoxes and all these things. They're like, oh my God, he's talking about my life. It's like psychology.
And with this also being on Turner Classic Movies, you already know you got a built-in crowd that just adores movies and wants to find out more about what they can find out. So how was it like partnering with Turner Classic Movies on the power of film as well?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. They're a perfect sort of home for the series. The partnership came quite late. So we made this series independently. And when we finished, we brought it to TCM. And it was just a very quick, yes, we love this. We want to show this. We've never done anything quite like this, but it's also sort of perfect for our audience. Like they were very appreciative of it. And I think, knew that it was a really great fit for their audience.
Yeah, we've been thrilled because they love film. And even though we talk about contemporary films as well, Howard does, I should say, it's this crowd, these are people who really dig cinema. So it is the perfect place to launch it. I'm quite sure we'll be on other platforms in the coming months or, year, but what a perfect place to launch it. It's just like, yeah, they've been great.
So the collaboration process, what was that all like for you and Howard as well on the power of film?
Very, very back and forth, very, very collaborative. Howard is great to work with. He's honest. If things don't work, sometimes he'd say like, sorry guys, like I appreciate the edit you did on this section, but it's not really my point. You're missing my main point. And just like a teacher, we would our tail between our legs, we'd go back and say, oh, we got a C minus on that one. I mean, I'm joking, of course, but like no, he can be super honest, and if something doesn't work, he says so. But he also just very patient, very supportive. I think he was really appreciative that Laura and I were devoting our time, and all the others who worked on this over the years were devoting all of their time to just bringing this about. So it was kind of a labor of love, and he really appreciated that throughout.
Yeah, and I will say that the collaboration, we showed everything that we were working on to Howard. We would get it in like pretty good shape. Like Doug and I and our other editors would all agree, okay, we're ready to show Howard. But it was down to like, writing the VO lines, voiceover lines we needed to add to make a little scene work. We would kind of work on even the writing of those lines, all of us together. So it was very, very, even down to the details, very collaborative.
But very complicated. It's been overwhelming because we're trying to take 50 years plus teaching, 50 years of this guy's teaching, and boil it down to 6 episodes. And so that means a lot of stuff had to be cut out and omitted. Even if it was great, even if we loved it, it's like, okay, that's not going to make it in. That's hurting episode 4. Let's just get rid of it, stuff like that. And, there was one point at which we had a wall. I mean, like a big wall. You can't see my room, but like certainly
Right.
more than the wall behind me, with hundreds, and I mean hundreds of index cards with all of these different points and different films and different ideas. And they were all in order and be like, okay, here's episode 1, here's maybe episode 2. Wait, this card should go over to episode 3. It was, it was like writing a screenplay. It was just like any other project, any like structuring a documentary. That's what we do. We just have index cards, or we do it online, or you got to figure out how to tell the stories. But we eventually got there, and it all generally works,
And were there any films that didn't make the cut for the series that you were like, oh, I wish we could have included that one? Because his
Absolutely.
thoughts on that would have been so fantastic.
Well, interestingly enough, one of Howard's all-time favorite films, Singing in the Rain, did not make the cut. And Doug and I both love that film too. And we cut a really great sort of section around Singing in the Rain, and it just didn't work in the episode ultimately. And there are lots of others too, but that's the one that comes to mind first.
Yeah, it was so ironic. It was literally his favorite film. Maybe The Godfather on that one. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
it just was like, wait a minute. We got to the end. We're like, how is it possible that that's not in the entire series? Like, it's his life's work. And anyway, but you know what? That's editing. There's a phrase all editors use. I'm sure you've heard it: murder your darlings. It means just like, save the story by getting rid of the thing that's getting in the way, even if it's great.
Because after hearing Howard talk on the first 2 episodes, I was like, I would love his take on Bullet with Steve McQueen, just to see his thoughts on that film as well.
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you know, funny, isn't there? Oh wow, you'd think I'd know, but there's so much material in here now, even I'm forgetting. Isn't Didn't we used to have a whole chase sequence scene with Bullet
Did.
in the streets
We
of San
did.
Francisco? And
We
it's
did.
not in the final episode, but he does talk about chase sequences. And I think we have the Bourne identity in there now, which is really interesting. I don't know where Bullet went, but there's a perfect example. That's not in the cut right now. Damn, you're making me think, okay, we better go upload a feature.
Well, this could be for season 2. How about that?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And what can we expect from episodes 3 to whatever episodes there are? Because I've only seen the first 2, so what more can we expect from the series?
Well, the episodes they continue to grow in both depth and referring to things we've already learned or heard about in earlier episodes. So, for example, he'll keep mentioning the word trapped in later episodes, and you'll see characters in traps, and he can now freely talk about that because he's introduced it. But it's pretty simple. And in part 3, he talks about character relationships. He talks about triangles of characters and how they can play off each other, and the power structure of that, and why that's so entertaining and why that works so well. He talks about the differential of power, like if somebody starts with no power and somebody else, another character has a lot of power, how that just has to shift and how that works and why that's so entertaining to us as viewers. A lot of, he talks about actors, he talks about persona. Episode 4, he talks about heroes and villains. That could have easily been episode 1 because it's very basic. He just starts at the beginning and says, okay, you think heroes are this, and you think villains are all this. And then he just flips it on its head completely and talks about how heroes are often the ones who are the most trapped, and they're like sometimes almost boring because they have to be saving society, and the villains are fascinating and they can be chaos, and I could go on and on. But anyway, he breaks that down. He dispels myths throughout the whole thing. And then I don't know what else, Flora. Episode 5,
Episode
Paradox.
5. Yep. It's called The Power of Paradox. And I think which is probably maybe all of ours, Howard, Doug, and myself, all of our favorite episode, perhaps. It's a really deeply psychological episode about how paradox is used in film and in characters. And then 6 is love and meaning. So we really look at love stories and why do certain love stories last? Usually it's because of the separation or death of one of the lovers. Things that we don't really think about. So he always takes it to a place that's really about audience psychology. That he may be talking about heroes and villains, but it's still about audience psychology and why these things sort of churn around in our brains, and we remember these movies and want to see them again and again.
Right. And before you two took Harold's class, what were some of the films that got you so invested in the film industry, and what made film so important to you two?
For me, I would say I was affected by Midnight Cowboy at a very young age. I mean, I was like 12 or something. I mean, I'm a lot older. Obviously, that's a film from the 70s, but that tells you how old I am. But really blew my mind. Like, completely changed my understanding of what a film could be. And, I'd watched like Planet of the Apes before that. And then I'd say the 2 films that affected me the most and inspired me to become a filmmaker when I was in my 20s were Blade Runner and the documentary Koyaanisqatsi. I mean, I make documentary films, and so does Laura. So, I mean, I love features. Someday I'd love to do a feature. I like scripts. I love working with actors, but I ended up making docs. That's my career just became that. But those 2 films really, really, really shook me and blew me away.
Yeah, and I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, and I didn't actually go to the movies that much growing up. We watched things that were,
Right.
reruns, on television, I have to say. And it wasn't until I think, and then even going to college in, the late 80s, we didn't have a film department where I went to undergrad. There were no film classes. So I really think I discovered films living in New York City and San Francisco, going to art house theaters and just seeing things all the time. My brain exploded. And I thought, wow, I've been missing out on all of this. I think for me, one film, Sex, Lies, and Videotapes, sort of rocked my world a little bit. Just the time it came out, and it was sort of this like explosion of independent American cinema that was so exciting. And then I also remember seeing The Life and Times of Harvey Milk too,
Yeah.
when it came out, and that also sort of really introduced me to documentary storytelling.
I've never heard you say that. That was a huge one for me.
Yeah.
Just huge. I was just like, oh my God, that is the most insane story, and powerful and political, and everything is still human. And yeah.
And that movie still works today. I recently showed that film to my daughters who are in their 20s now, and they were blown away by it. It works because of how it's structured, It works because it taps into human emotion, all the things that Howard teaches.
Totally.
And what's next for you two as well?
I'm working on a couple music films, which I'm not at liberty to share details with, but I'm excited about, like a feature, about an artist and some other projects. And I'm also working on a short film about America's issue with gun violence and gun rights. Not the issue, just trying to have what I'll call a healthy conversation, if that is at all possible in
Right.
2024, on that incredibly incendiary and very divisive subject. I'm trying to make a film where we actually hear from all sides and really try to get into it. And that's working with Ketch Secor, who's the lead singer of Old Crow Medicine Show, the bluegrass country band,
Oh, yeah.
and sort of following him on his journey as he tries to have this conversation and I think succeeds out there in America, like in a lot of different communities. So that's something I'm working on presently. But I'm spending a lot of time working on the power of film, like getting it out there and getting people to start talking about it, and really appreciate your coverage of it. Laura?
Um, I have a feature documentary coming out in either April or May, sometime later this year, about how COVID exposed what's broken about our American food system. So, but it's very character driven, and it's very much about kind of how rural America is dying and why, mostly because of consolidation and the excesses of capitalism, which a lot of documentaries are about these days. But so I'm working on that, and then I'm also kind of taking a break this year, doing a little sabbatical.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me at Infamous Horror. It's been real fun, and congratulations on the series.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your interest.
Yeah, thanks for covering us, and really appreciate you helping spread the word. We really do.
Anytime, and for those documentaries, I would love to review them as well.
By the way, I want to say one more thing. You have Clockwork Orange right behind you.
Yes.
Well, Howard talks about the power of psychopaths in episode 4 when he's talking about, I think, no, is it episode 3?
3, I think. I think it's 3.
Oh, yeah, he talks about how there's this common character that we've come to know and love in these great movies called The Psychopath. And he talks about Clockwork Orange and Silence of the Lambs, and he talks about Psycho, and it's kind of, I think you in particular might appreciate episode 3 for that reason.
You got to check it out. Well, guys, thank you so much again.